All right, so similar to last class, we're going to go through a small amount of the PowerPoint, and then we're going to go into your review for next week's midterm. Basically identical to what we did this morning, except different material. And then you guys will pick 1 and 2, same like last time. So you should make a note to yourself so you remember what number you are, so you don't forget for each class. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about HACCP. HACCP is one of the sort of more critical parts of food safety. It's something that's relatively new to Taiwan for sure, and even in Asia it's still fairly new. It's not really practiced a whole lot, practiced or enforced in certain parts of food and beverage industries. So for example, in Taiwan, maybe a large company that produces food for 7-Eleven would have to be certified under HACCP. But then you go to a night market and there's no food safety really going on at all at that, right? So that's kind of the problem here, is that they enforce it only part of the time, right? And what they need to do is enforce it all the time. A lot like the driving. So we're going to get into HACCP. We're going to just talk a little bit about what it is, where it's from, a bit of its history, and the basic principles of it and then after your midterm we'll get into the more technical part of it. I don't want your brains to explode just yet. We'll wait until after the midterm, and then I'll make your brains explode with all the information you have to know. Just joking, I don't think your brains will really explode, although if they do, we'll have it on camera, and we can sell it and make lots of money on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, and all kinds of things. Okay? So, let's get into it here. HACCP. So HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. Okay? Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. Again, another acronym, right? Acronyms are things that are abbreviated to letters, form a long sentence or a long chain of words like FIFO, TCS, MIT, and then we have HACCP or HACCP. Okay? So it involves quite a lot of different steps or processes. But basically it's a system for food safety that's used to prevent contamination from any kind of biological or chemical or physical food hazard. Okay? And we'll get into some of these categories later, okay, in the next half of the course. We'll talk more about physical and biological and chemical food hazards. For example, if a piece of glass gets in someone's food and they eat it, that would be a physical food hazard, right? It's a physical thing, okay? If some bleach, okay, or some sort of window cleaner gets in someone's food and they eat it, that would be a chemical, right? And then bacteria, parasites, these are biological. Okay, so there's different groups of food hazards. We'll get into all that later. But basically, HACCP is a system that focuses on preventative measures rather than reactive. Okay, do you understand the difference between prevent and react? Yes or no? Do you understand the difference between preventative and reactive?
Yes.
What is preventative?
Before it happens.
Yes, to stop something happening, right? To prevent it from even happening. You guys have seen the Avengers, right? You know the Avengers?
Yes.
Yeah? In the end game, they go back in time to prevent Thanos doing the snap, right? So that's like the Avengers HACCP plan. Okay? They prevent something from even happening. Okay? Rather than reactive, which is when you wait for something to happen and then you're like, oh, let's do something. Let's change something. Okay? So HACCP is a way to prevent foodborne illnesses and food hazards happening before they happen. Okay? It's a system designed to think ahead, to think for you. Okay? And it's a system that involves several steps that are steps to set up a HACCP plan, and then steps in each process of food manufacturing. Whether it's in a restaurant or a food and beverage manufacturing company, whatever it is, okay, they all should have a HACCP plan. Okay? HACCP is now one of the most common systems worldwide. Okay? There's two systems that are used, ISO, and HACCP. ISO you'll probably see on a lot of manufactured goods. Okay? And HACCP is also one of the most common systems used worldwide. Not when I first moved to Taiwan. When I first moved to Taiwan, nobody knew what HACCP was. HACCP wasn't even a thing in Taiwan. Then I left Taiwan and moved back, and then the government was like, oh, we want to do HACCP. And so they came to my hotel, and they were like, oh, we want to do like the HACCP, all the steps and certification. And I said, yeah, but does the supplier also have HACCP? I said, no. I said, okay, but we have to start with the supplier, because if they don't have it, then if I get something, it's going to be contaminated, right? So they started the wrong way. They started from the top and tried to go down. But really you have to start at the bottom and go up, okay? But basically it's a system that we use in every stage, from receiving to production, throughout the whole system of cooking or producing or preparing any kind of food product or drink. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's food or beverage, HACCP systems have to be used in all of it. Okay? And basically, it's a system that once it's done properly or designed properly, it's a system that through proper training, reporting, and monitoring, you should be able to prevent any foodborne illness. Now, there's always going to be flaws in the system. Okay? Think about a computer. Right? Do computers always work the way you want them to work, when you want them to work? Do they? Does a computer always work the way you want it to work? No, right? Computers, 75% of the time, they suck, right? You're just like, I'm usually just swearing at my computer, banging my hands on the table like King Kong, right? Getting very angry, thinking like, Bill Gates, you son of a, right? Because I get, they're supposed to work, right? They're expensive, right? They're supposed to work, but they don't, because it's still a new technology, right? There's still flaws in the system. And even with HACCP is a system designed to, how do I word this so you understand it? It's a system designed that when there's a mistake, you make a correction to the system so that there's no longer a further mistake. Okay? So for example, when you're young, right, you don't know everything. You think you do, right? You think you know everything, right? But as you gain experience, then you gain wisdom, right? And the wisdom is really intelligent, right? That's true knowledge, right? So HACCP is a system designed that as you use it more and more and more and more, you learn to recognize possible problems. And so the more you use it, the better you become at designing it. So that once you design several systems, you're very good at predicting where problems might occur. And I'll go through this entire process of how to design a HACCP system, how to design HACCP record keeping, because that's also important. If you work at a restaurant, okay, and let's say a bunch of people come to your restaurant, they get sick, right? Or they come to your restaurant, they go home, they get sick, okay? They go to the doctor tests their poop, their pee, right? That's usually what happens, right? And they're able to analyze it and figure out what caused the illness. Then what happens is the government does an investigation, because the government wants to know, why did 100 people get sick, right? And it could be life-threatening, right? You can get foodborne illness and die, right? We've seen some videos where people almost died, where people did die, right? Remember that the mother, the son and the daughter were there talking with their mother who died in Las Vegas, right? And there was a mother with a baby, the pregnant lady, right? Her baby almost died, right? Just for eating a sandwich, right? I love a good sandwich. I don't want to die eating a sandwich. So we're going to talk a lot about, in the future discourse, about how to design a record-keeping system, because if the government comes to your restaurant and says, we think that someone ate here and got sick, because they're going to check the last 3 or 4 places that person ate, right? Usually, people often make the mistake of eating something, if they feel bad, they think it's the very last thing they ate, right? But that's not always true, because remember there's one thing, the lag time, right? There's other things, other factors as well, right, that we'll get into later. But it takes time for a bacteria to actually affect your body, right? It's not like you just eat something like, oh my God, oh, right? It doesn't work like that. Usually you eat, you go home, chill out, maybe the next day, you wake up, ooh, I don't feel very good. Maybe even later in the day, maybe 2 days, you're not feeling it, right? And then you automatically think, oh, what's the last thing I ate? It doesn't really work like that. So what happens is the government will ask the people, right? What's the last 5, 6 places you ate? Where? Oh, at home one day, at this restaurant, another day at home. And they'll look for common connections, right? And then they're going to investigate. They're going to come to your restaurant, they're going to say, hey, we want to take a look around, we want to see what's going on, we want to do a health inspection. We want to know what happened. So one of the major important things is to record everything you do in a kitchen. Okay? When you're making something, you take its temperature. When you receive products, you take the temperature, right? But you also have to record it. Okay? If the government comes to your restaurant and they want to see your records, if you have everything very professional, right? In books, this is our receiving book. Every day, everything's logged. What's the product, where it comes from, what the temperature is, what time it is, who received it. Okay, and then you go to the kitchen, and this is our processing log. Open it up. Okay, this is this recipe, who made it, what time, what temperature, right? This is the finish, so everything is really professional. The health department, the government is going to say, oh, these guys are really professional. They keep track of everything, right? They're going to think, probably not here. If they go to another restaurant, and it's very messy, there's no records, no one seems to know what's going on, who do you think they're probably going to be more hard on? They're going to investigate more, probably the restaurant that's unprepared, right? Because if you're doing all of these things, the chances are you're probably taking care to be food safe, right? If you're just messy and not keeping track of anything, the chances are you don't know anything about food safety. So they're going to investigate you more, okay? And so this is where HACCP comes into a real critical part of your food safety operation, your food safety plans, okay? So you have to remember, HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, okay? You'll need to remember that, trust me. Especially for a test, like, ooh, I don't know, next week, like that test. So, HACCP was originally created by NASA. You guys know what NASA is? Yeah? NASA, they send everybody into space, right, from America? Okay. And the Pillsbury Company. Have you heard of the Pillsbury Company? They make a lot of bread products. Their mascot is kind of a big kind of dough character, and people poke it in the stomach. You've never seen that before? Pillsbury dough? If you want, you can take it on your phone, you can Google Pillsbury, P-I-L-L-S-B-U-R-Y company. Very, very big American company, actually multinational company. They make all kinds of things now. They make cookies, they make bread, they make pizza, they make frozen bread, they make tons and tons of products. Okay, massive, massive company. So the Pillsbury Company were one of the largest food manufacturing companies in the U.S. In the 1960s. So a long time ago, yeah? About 60 years ago, okay? 70 years ago, 50 years ago. Can't do math. 50 years ago. So what happened was NASA needed a system to make sure that the food they sent into space with astronauts was safe. Because think about this, when you get food poisoning, what usually happens to you? What are some symptoms? You get upset stomach? Yeah. What else? What's even worse?
Throw up.
Yeah, both ends, right? Right? Yes or no? Yes. Can you imagine being in space? Right? That's probably the worst place you want to be. I would rather be anywhere else. I would rather be in, I don't know, in front of Taipei 101, in public, than be in space having to do that, right? But joking aside, what they're really concerned about is that when you're sick, you don't think very clearly, right? You're tired, you make mistakes, right? So think of a situation in which you would really not want to make a mistake. In space, right? Because if you make a mistake, you're done. You know what I mean? Space is unforgiving, very dangerous, right? So they need to make sure that the astronauts are focused, are healthy, and are ready to do their job, right? So NASA approached Pillsbury Company, and together they designed a system called HACCP, and this was in order to produce food that was safe to eat in space, but also another byproduct of that was that the food that when they took into space had to be extended shelf life, right? Because you're in space sometimes for a very long time, right? And initially had to be crumb-free. You know what crumbs are, right? You're eating some chips, you look here, and you got a whole collection of crumbs, right? You're eating a cookie, you look here, oh, there's a little cookie right there, right? It's all the little pieces of food that fall from your face, right? But in old spaceships, they're very sensitive to debris, foreign things, right? So they didn't want crumbs and stuff going into the instrumentation because that could affect the spaceship, okay? Nowadays, spaceships are much more advanced. They still worry about food safety, but not so much crumbs, okay? And anyway, so that's the history of HACCP, okay? So it was designed as a system to make food safe to go into space. Then they took it and applied it into the real world. So NASA engineers, these are the people that make spaceships, they use something called critical control points when they're designing a spacesuit or rockets or even the spaceship itself. Okay? What that basically means is that a critical control point would be the design of something, how far can you take it before it breaks? Okay? So for example, the spacesuit, how high of a temperature can I get before I die? So how in the sun, when you're in space, the sun is extremely powerful, right? You know that we have a protective layer around the Earth, right? But when you're in outer space, that layer is gone, right? So they use these critical control points to test the limits of something, okay? So what the Pillsbury Company did, in conjunction with the NASA scientists, was that they used a similar approach to food processing. What are the limits of processing? What are they that can be done safely? Okay, so how far can we take this safely before it becomes unsafe? Okay, so that's how they designed the system of critical control points in food production. Now this may seem very weird, okay? And I admit, it is a little strange using a space program to design a food safety program. But once we get into the material later, and you start looking at all the data and the sheets and the limits, it'll make much more sense to you, I hope, okay? At any rate, once Pillsbury had developed the system for NASA, everybody was happy. Of course, the astronauts were happy because they were in space. No twasai, right, in space, right? So they could be very happy. Think about it, in your spacesuit, you don't want twasai then, right? That's bad for you. You don't speak Chinese. So everybody's happy, right? So then what happened was, the company, Pillsbury, had an event where baby food was contaminated and a lot of babies got sick, okay? And one of the scientists or the engineers that worked for Pillsbury, who also worked at NASA, suggested, hey, you know what we should do? That HACCP program that we designed for NASA, we should change it and use it in our company so that we can prevent any further contamination. Okay? So, it took a foodborne illness outbreak at the company for the scientists to say, let's use this program that we made and let's implement it into our own operation. And that is how HACCP went from space to food production companies. Okay? So HACCP is now an integral part of food processing. Okay? Very important part. We're not going to worry too much about this. This is basically after the scientists at Pillsbury convinced Pillsbury to implement HACCP into their system. Then what happened was that it went to a national conference of food production. So in the US, every year they have this big conference where people get together and talk about food safety, food production, technology, things like that. And at this conference, it was then decided that HACCP will be implemented into food manufacturing companies and eventually into restaurants, okay, over the course of many, many years, okay? Again, this is pretty much just some historical stuff. We're not going to worry too much about it, okay? It won't ever be on a test, I promise. All right, let me make sure. Yeah, we don't need to worry about this. This particular information will never be on a test. It's just some more history of the system and how it became prevalent now. But just remember that it started in the US. It means hazard analysis and critical control points. And it was designed for use in space and then for use in everyday food production applications. When I say food production, that term, food production, covers every aspect, right? A restaurant is a food production. Okay, the company that makes hamburgers for McDonald's, food production. Okay, the companies that make Hygiene, food production. Okay, it's all one big industry. Okay? So just make sure you understand that term when I say food production. It means any kind of food or beverage producer. So there are some terminologies just at the bottom here. There's some little definitions, basic definitions that you need to know when we talk about food safety and HACCP. In particular, core temperature. We talked about this before when we talked about MIT. You remember when we were talking about minimum internal temperature? When you're taking the temperature of a product, you're going to this most central part. Okay, and that would be the core. Think about the Earth, we have a core, right? That's the center, right? So core temperature is the temperature at the thickest part of any product. Okay? So that's the most accurate way to tell temperature. Cold, cool, or cooling chain. So this is the process to maintain good temperature control in chilled or frozen products. So the cooling chain means that anything that's frozen or refrigerated is in a cooling chain. So if it's in a supplier, at their location in a fridge, or then into a refrigerated truck, or then into my refrigerator, the cooling chain should never be broken, should never be disrupted. So if I take something from the freezer and I throw it into a car or a truck that's not frozen, I then stop the cooling chain. Okay? So it's a consecutive set of events to keep something cold. Okay? So through transportation or handling or processing, the cooling chain should never be broken. Okay? And again, we will go through all of these terminology later, and you'll understand more how each one fits into HACCP. Okay? Corrective action. So at any point during the processing of food, there's critical control points. And these are points when you are doing something to a food product that exposes it or causes the risk of foodborne illness to increase. Okay? So for example, and I use chicken a lot because it's just an easy example. If I have chicken in my fridge and I take it out to marinate it, that action, the marinating process, is a critical control point. Because I've taken it out of the fridge and now I'm doing something to it. So I have to control any kind of possible scenario where the food might be contaminated. To give you a very good example, if I take out chicken and it stays out of my fridge for more than 4 hours, I've broken the critical control point. The control point is to keep it a maximum of 4 hours out of the fridge, correct? Right, TCS? So that is my control. I'm controlling that product, okay, by keeping it 4 hours maximum out of the fridge. If I go out of that control, then I have to do what is called a corrective action. And a corrective action is anything that brings me back into my HACCP plan, my safe food safety plan. Okay? So think of it like you're walking down a path, okay? And the path is food safety, right? Your receiving is one area, and the other area at the end of the path is the customer, right? So as I'm walking down my path making food, if I deviate from my path, I need to make a corrective action, brings me back to my path. I'm back on food safety, food goes to the customer, achieved, my job is achieved, okay? So a corrective action is something we do to make sure that we get back into food safety. For example, another corrective action, and I'm not going to go on too much more about this, but do you recall we were talking about minimum internal temperatures, cooking temperatures last week, yeah? And we also talked about cooling, right? So if I'm cooling something, I do stage 1 cooling, which was 140 to 40, right? And in 4 hours. If I don't achieve that temperature, do you remember what my corrective action is?
Heat it up here.
To what temperature?
140. More than 140.
165. 165 for how many seconds? 15. Very good. So my corrective action is then to heat up the food again and start the cooling process again. Okay? Make sense? Yeah? So the 140 is the temperature that we start from. Okay? 140 or above for stage 1 cooling. But for corrective actions, we have to go to the minimum internal temperature of 165 for 15 seconds. So that is an example of a corrective action. Okay, we tried to cool the food down in time. We didn't achieve our goal. We have to then heat it up again and start again. Right? So going along that path of food safety, we're trying to cool the food down. We don't do it in time. Now we have to heat it up and we start again. Okay? So that is corrective action. Critical control point, as I mentioned just now with the chicken, this is any step in which control can be applied as essential to prevention or elimination food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. So as I mentioned, cooling something down, that's a critical control point. Okay? I can control that time. I can control that temperature. Okay? Marinating chicken out of the fridge, I can control how much time it's out of the fridge. So a critical control point is any step in the food safety program or the safety plan in which you have to apply control to something. If I have a box of chicken in the freezer, and it's just sitting in the freezer, is there any kind of critical point there? Is anything going to change? No. It's going to be frozen forever, right? So that's not a critical control point, right? But when I receive the chicken, it's frozen. I have to check if it's frozen. That's a control point, right? Once I check it's frozen, what do I have to do with it? Do I just leave it out? If I'm in my restaurant and a delivery comes of frozen chicken, do I leave it on the counter? Where do I put it? I put it in the freezer, right? So this is a critical control point. You understand? If I leave it on the counter, it's now uncontrolled. Okay? It's any stage where you have to make a decision. Right? That's a critical control point. You have to decide what is going to happen to this product and how does it stay safe. Okay? And when we go through this later, as I said, this is just an introduction to HACCP. You're not going to understand HACCP all today, so don't even try. But as we get later into this course, we will go through more in-depth how to evaluate a critical control point. Okay? Is this a critical control point or not? there's a series of questions that you ask yourself. Okay? Just understand the definition. Okay? Critical control point. A critical limit is the criteria which separates acceptable from unacceptable. Okay? So for example, a critical limit, when we talk about cooling, right? Stage 1 is 4 hours, right? So the critical limit would be anything over 4 hours, right? 4 hours is the limit. Anything more than that is now considered past the critical limit. Okay? So a critical limit is the farthest you can get from acceptable before it becomes unacceptable. Okay? That's a critical limit. Hazard is any kind of thing like physical, biological, chemical, allergen that could potentially cause illness or death or side effects. Okay, some sort of big human, an adverse health reaction for a human. Okay, oh, I guess and pets too, but we don't care about pets in this class. So a hazard is anything that can cause a negative side effect, okay? Whether it's upset stomach, diarrhea, vomiting, death, whatever it may be. There's a lot of different side effects, okay? So that's a hazard. Okay, now, this is the last part. I think this is the last bit about HACCP today, and then we'll get into the review for your, for your midterm. HACCP is broken down into 7 steps. Okay, and we'll review this many, many times during the course of this program. So HACCP is broken down into seven steps. Number 1, first you have to perform a hazard analysis. Okay, so a hazard analysis is when you go through your operation, okay, from receiving to customer. Again, think of this like a path. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to look at your entire process, and anywhere there could be a hazard, you're going to make notes of that. Okay? You're going to say these points, these steps are hazardous, right? Receiving, storing, manufacturing, processing, whatever you're doing with the food, you determine, is this a hazard or is it not a hazard? As I mentioned before, frozen chicken in the freezer, is that a hazard or not a hazard? No, right? Because it's frozen. Frozen chicken sitting on my table, hazard or not a hazard? Hazard, right? Because it's not under temperature control or time control now. So first thing you have to do is perform a hazard analysis to see where are the possibilities for hazards to happen. Okay? Next thing you need to do is identify critical control points. So once you've performed a hazard analysis, then you're going to set up the points or the stages through the production of the food that are control points. This is the point in the production where we have to apply control. So as I mentioned, when you take chicken out of the fridge, this is a control point, right? When I cook chicken, another control point, right? Because I have to make sure that when I cook the chicken, I reach 165 degrees Celsius, right? For 15 seconds. So that's another control point, okay? If I cook the chicken and cool it down to serve in a salad, I have to cool the chicken down. Another control point. Once it's cool, I have to store it in the fridge. Another control point. Right? So these are all the different stages where we have to identify control points. How can we control the safety of the food? Very, very important. Next, we have to set critical limits. So as I mentioned, the critical limits are the criteria that are the maximum allowed before it becomes unacceptable or dangerous. Right? Same thing. Our critical limits, most of these things you will know after this course. Okay? So for example, you know how long something can stay out of the fridge for. You know how long it should take to cool something. You know what temperature you have to cook it to. Right? So these are your critical limits. You set the critical limits. Okay? And these are mostly based on science. Okay, so a lot of scientists have done studies on food to figure out what are the critical limits of food. Okay? Then you set up monitoring requirements. And this is, as I mentioned before, how do you monitor or make sure that this system is being done? And again, we'll get into this in much more detail later. Okay? So we set up monitoring requirements to make sure that people are watching what other people are doing, right? Because it's fine to have a system, but if nobody follows it, what's the point, right? So we have to monitor people to make sure they're doing it. We define our corrective actions. So at a critical control point, if this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do this. If that happens, make sure you do this. Okay, so that no matter what happens, the staff know how to get back to the safe path, right? The food safety path. Okay, so we set up our corrective actions. HACCP validation, this basically means we make a HACCP plan and then we go through it to make sure that it really works. Okay, so we make sure, once we've done our HACCP plan, we go through it and we try to break the limit, do the corrective action. Break the limit, do the corrective action. And make sure that our final product is still safe. So we make sure that the system is true, or that it works properly, okay? And then we have to create record-keeping procedures. And as I mentioned before, it's important to have records of everything in case you have a problem with the government. You can say, no problem. Here's this record, here's this record, here's this paperwork, here's this paperwork. Everything's in order. Perfect. Your kitchen's clean, your staff know what they're doing. Great. So these are the 7 steps to hazard analysis and critical control points. I know that the first part of this program is very easy, right? Wash your hands. Make sure you go to the bathroom and then wash your hands. Right? Do up your shoes. Don't run. Yeah, now it's no fun. Yeah? So, these are the 7 principles or the 7 steps to a hazard analysis and critical control plan. Okay? Understand? Perfect. You will need to know these 7 steps for your test. So many things to know. So much information to memorize. You'll do fine. So HACCP plays a really critical, important role in food safety and the responsibilities of an operator. So if you run a restaurant or if you're a manufacturing company, you have some responsibilities. We're not going to worry too much about this. You should read it. But you have some responsibilities in terms of safety. You shouldn't put unsafe food into the marketplace, right? Especially knowingly. If you knowingly do it, you can go to jail. Okay? Your responsibility for the safety of the food that you're making. Okay? In terms of transparency, if the government comes to investigate you, you're responsible to provide them with information to let them investigate you, right? You can't try and hide things or anything like that when that happens. Emergency. So basically, if you're a food production company and there's a problem with your food, you need to get rid of it immediately, right? You're responsible for that product. Okay? Even if it's going to cost you money, you're still responsible for it. Prevention. This is basically that you will identify and regularly review your food safety plan to make sure it's still working. Okay? Once you do a food safety plan or a HACCP plan, this means it's good forever. Right? Think about, again, like a computer, right? You have Windows 9, you have Windows 8, but it's not going to be any good in 10 years, right? You have to update your system. Same with HACCP, right? You have to update your HACCP plan, make sure it's working, make any changes necessary, and continue to review it. Cooperation, again, this is similar to accountability or emergency and transparency, is that you need to make sure you're cooperating with the government or the health department to look at new regulations, enforce new regulations, help them find out about new regulations that need to be on the place or in the industry that aren't already. A lot of the times, the government doesn't know everything, right? That's for sure. Sometimes people that work in the industry discover that maybe we should have a new rule, or maybe we should change a little bit of the existing information, right? That's very common. And so when that happens, you should be working with your government or your health department to say, hey, I think we need to change this particular rule or this particular law because of this reason. Right? So that's part of the cooperation aspect of HACCP, is that you're all working for the same goal. And that goal is food safety, because nobody really wants to make anybody sick. Right? That's the last thing you want. Okay. We'll take a 2 or 3 minute break. Get some water, stretch your legs, and come back. We'll come back here at 2:10. Okay? So about 8 minutes, 7 minutes. We'll come back here and we'll go into our midterm review, and then you're done for the weekend.
Mulai pakai disuruh
sunshine, please. You guys sleep so much. I swear it's the weirdest thing. You guys are like 20 years old and you're always tired. It's like you're 20 and you're really like 80 years old. Like you're old people. All right, for your midterm review for your hygiene and safety midterm exam, you're going to need to know the following information. You will need to know about uniform standards. For example, what kinds of shoes are allowed to be worn in kitchens and what are not. Are you allowed to wear jewelry or accessories in the kitchen? Yes or no? No. What often are you allowed to wear?
Wedding ring.
Wedding ring. Not just any old ring, a wedding ring. What type of shoes are you supposed to be wearing?
Rubber.
They don't necessarily have to be rubber, but most importantly, you need to think about the bottom. What type of shoe? Anti-slip shoe. Okay? Remember that most accidents in the kitchen happen because of slips. So you need to be wearing closed back, slip-proof shoes, or anti-slip shoes. You should remember a few things about your knives, because they're a very important part of your toolkit. What should you remember about your knife? For example, is it better if your knife is sharp or dull?
Sharp.
Sharp. Why?
So it will not slip and come out in the
Right, it goes where you want it to go. What about when you hold a knife?
hold it down.
Point laid down by your side. If you are walking around a kitchen holding a knife, should you let people know? Yes, what can you say? Sure, what else can you say? There's two words. Hot, right? You can also say hot, right? Hot, sharp, right? It's the same thing. They're both danger words in the kitchen, right? If you say hot or say sharp, it alerts the person that behind them is something dangerous, right? So either one works. Okay, you can say hot or you can say sharp. It doesn't really matter. Remember that a sharp knife is a safe knife, and when you're walking with your knife, you're carrying it down by your side, point facing down. If your knife falls off your workstation, should you try and catch it?
No.
No. What should you do?
Fall.
Yes, but also you should back up. Yeah, you don't want to stay standing right there because the knife can bounce off the ground right into your leg. Okay? So when a knife falls, you just back away, let it fall. Okay? You're not going to catch it. And if you do, you'll probably cut your hand open. This is what we already just talked about. Yep. Oh, and what do you always cut on? Huh? I can't hear what you're saying. Still can't hear what you're saying. What should you always cut on using a knife? Your fingernails? What should you cut on? What? Cutting board. Very good. Not your fingernails. So you don't cut on tables, you don't cut on wooden tables, you don't cut on metal tables, you only cut on a cutting board. And I guarantee you, I'm sure I will catch you at some point cutting on a metal table. I guarantee you. Mark my words right now. At some point, I will catch one of you, or more than one of you in this room right now, cutting on something you should not be cutting on. Guaranteed. So workplace safety is really important, right? And pretty much all accidents can be avoided and prevented, yeah? Yeah, so you're going to want to know, how should you keep your workstation? Clean, organized, right? If it's messy and dirty, you're going to have a problem, right? Should you clean as you go or let dirt build up? go. Start with a clean workstation and clean as you go, so you'll have a clean, organized workstation your whole shift, okay? What about workplace walkways and hallways? How should they be kept?
Dry.
Yeah, dry. Floors should be always dry as well, yeah. What about the lights? Should they be well lit or dark? Well lit, right? Can you leave stuff lying all over the floor? No. So your workplace hallways and walkways should be kept well lit, organized, clean, free of any debris or clutter on the ground so that people don't walk and trip over things. Remember when we looked at the statistics that around 30% of workplace accidents are trips and falls. Right? And that's all because people leave stuff lying all over the ground. Or they're not well lit. So make sure that they're well lit and clear and clean, okay? What about equipment? Equipment safety. What should you do when you're not using, what should you do and not do when using equipment? What are some things? So for example, if you're not trained on how to use equipment, should you use it?
No.
No, of course not. When you're cleaning equipment, what should you do to it? Turn it off? But couldn't you easily just turn it back on again? What's something you should do so it doesn't matter if it's on or off? Unplug it. Right? It's fine, you can turn it off, right? But maybe you're cleaning it and accidentally turn it back on. Uh-oh, my fingers are gone. Right? So when you're cleaning a machine, turn it off, unplug it, clean it, put it back together. Okay? Receiving is also a really important role, both financially and for food safety. So you're going to want to know how does it do this? How does receiving play an important role in food safety and financially? What are the three things that we check when we receive an order? Sorry, what? Quality, quantity, and temperature. So how does that affect our food safety and our financial safety, or our financial ability in a restaurant? How? You need to know how to do that, right? How to explain that.
Make sure the quality is what we order.
But why does that matter?
Because if it's less, then we
Make sure the notification will not
I can barely hear you.
to make sure our restaurant reputation will not be broken. because of
Sure,
the-
yeah, that's sort of an explanation way up here. We're looking for an explanation here. It's almost like Asian discovery and shotgun. It's similar. Well, think about it, and I mentioned this before. If a company sends us too much chicken, we only need 10 kilos, they send us 15 kilos, then it's my responsibility to use it all. Maybe I can't, it goes in the garbage. So I just pay to throw out chicken, right? So you have to check the quality and quantity. If you accept the order and the quality is no good, where does it go? In the garbage, right? If it doesn't go in the garbage, maybe you serve it and the customer gets sick, right? So this is how it affects our financial success and our food safety, right? You have to check these three things, okay? Remember, quality, quantity, and temperature. And we just talked about this, right? When you're receiving items for the dry storeroom, how should you put them into your dry storeroom? There's some very specific information in your book about how you should store them in your storeroom. For example, what's the easiest one to remember? How high off the ground should they be? 15 centimeters, not 15 meters, right? Not 15 liters. What else?
keep all storage containers tightly close to protect.
Yes. When we receive something, we take it out of the box it's in, because we don't bring boxes into the restaurant. We put it into a proper storage container with a tightly fitting lid. Should we put something on that lid? What should we put on the lid? A label. Date, yes. What is the item? What's the date? Okay? Look back in your informational about personal hygiene. When should you be washing your hands?
Before entering kitchen.
Before entering a kitchen, yeah, what else?
After touching fresh ingredients.
Yeah, after touching PHF ingredients, but yeah, after touching food, sure. What else?
After touching food.
Yeah, after touching food, what else? There's more than 2 times you should wash your hands, trust me.
After going to the toilet.
After using the, yes, thank you. That should have been pretty high up on the list here. After going to the bathroom. What else?
After leaving the kitchen.
Huh?
Leaving the kitchen.
After leaving the kitchen? Yeah, I mean that's the same as what he said, when you enter the kitchen. So that's, after leaving the kitchen, yes, you have to come back, so it's the same thing. So we've got 3 things so far, there's more of them. Using the bathroom, touching foods, entering the kitchen, after smoking, yeah, after touching your face or your skin, right? Look in your book, please, because there are several examples of when you should be washing your hands. All right? How often do you shower or bathe? Every day. Remember information about food service gloves. What are they made for? Are they made to use all day? No. They're made for single use. Yeah? You use them, you discard them. Okay? They're designed to protect the customer, not protect you. Okay? So they are single-use food service gloves. Okay? That is what they're made for. You are going to have to remember your color-coded cutting boards. Remember for cross-contamination. What are your color-coded cutting boards? Yellow for what? You're going to need to know this. Yeah? Huh? Red for meat, yes. Green for vegetables and fruits.
Black for cooked foods.
Black for ready-to-eat foods. Not all ready-to-eat foods are cooked, right? So, red is for meat, green is for veg and fruit, black is ready to eat, blue for fish and seafood, white is for dairy. Yes, I know that. And we're missing one. Yellow is for poultry. You need to know all of those. All right? Is it important to label, date, and cover food in the fridge? Why? What does the date matter?
Expired dates.
You need to know when things are produced, when they're going to go bad. It's also important for FIFO, right? If I make a batch of salad dressing, I put it in the fridge with no date, and then someone else makes a batch of salad dressing, maybe they put it in front. Okay? But that's an old batch in front of a new batch, right? It's important that cooks can be able to identify things, what they are, how old they are, without having to guess. Okay? So we always label and date things in a fridge. Again, all of this is in your book. Okay? All of it. When storing food orders in your fridge, is there a particular order in which you should do it? So you have a fridge. How do you store things in that fridge? What's on the top? Ready to eat. And then? Fruits and vegetables. And then? Fish and seafood. And then? Yeah. And then? And then? Raw poultry. However, you need to do this without looking at your book. Yeah? Because your book won't be with you when you take the test next week. Huh? So you have to remember these. Why is this order important?
So they choose from the realm, it will not go down. The bacteria from the realm.
Yeah, but why is that important?
To make
So-
sure that the food won't, the temperature will kill all of the bacteria.
You're almost there. Why is that important?
To avoid cross-contamination.
Yes, but why is that important?
Because the minimum cooking temperature
Is?
is
No, not everything has the same minimum
the
temperature.
below the most.
So, stop. Think. We have an order of how we store things in the fridge, correct? Why do we do it that specific? Why can't I put fish down here? So they get cooked anyway, right?
Because poultry has the highest minimum time, cooking time.
Not time.
Temperature.
Temperature. You have to remember this. Okay? There's a reason we do this. You have to be able to tell me that you know why. Okay? So we store things in a specific order because the things on the bottom are the highest minimum internal cooking temperature. The things higher up are the lower cooking temperatures. So that if we get cross-contamination, there's less chance of a foodborne illness. Okay? You have to remember that. Remember that the minimum internal temperature and the order we store things are related. Okay? The higher the temperature, the lower in the fridge. Okay? So it's basically like a yin and yang, yeah? Higher temperature, lower fridge. Okay? It's a very simple concept. Okay, what does TCS stand for? Yes, time and temperature is a control for safety. Why does that matter? What's the basic principle of TCS?
For the food safety.
Right, but how do we achieve that? What's the...
Control time and temperature.
Yes. So if we can't control temperature, how do we control the time?
Cooking for a longer time.
Not cooking, nothing to do with cooking. You all need to study your book far more than what is apparent at this point. How many hours can I keep food out of the fridge for? Okay, there you go. Thank you. That is my time control. So what we're doing is either we're controlling it via temperature or we're controlling it via time, maximum of 4 hours, to prevent what? 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 32. Thank you. We're trying to prevent bacteria growing on the food, right? So that's what TCS is for. You need to understand and be able to explain that in a simple way. Okay? What about FIFO? What does it stand for? Yes. And why does it matter? What does it mean? What do we do? Explain FIFO. So imagine I didn't know what FIFO was. You have to be able to explain it to me.
To make sure that the all food will always be before close them.
Yes, but how do we do that?
By labeling the date.
Okay, but if I label it, put the new in front of the old, that doesn't work out. So it's a method of rotating stock, making sure the old stock comes forward and the new stock goes back. Why do we do that? We're trying to stop two things from happening. Food waste and food illness. Right? We don't want to serve food to a customer that's bad, and we don't want to throw food away that's bad. Right? So we're trying to limit as much as possible that by rotating the stock. The old comes front, the new goes in the back. Okay? You have to be able to explain this to me like I don't know. Right? Because if you can't, that means you don't know. Yeah? So you're going to need to know TCS, and you're going to need to be able to explain it. I'm not looking for a super detailed novel. Okay? It doesn't have to be an explanation 10,000 words long. But I have to know that you understand the basic principle behind it. Okay? Alright. Don't worry too much about spelling. Okay, I can read your spelling. I mean within reason, yeah? If the answer is Australia and you write Austria, that's wrong, right? If the answer is cat and you write can't, that's wrong, okay? But if it's within reason, I'll give you the point, okay? So don't worry so much about your spelling. Worry about getting your idea across, okay? Your spelling I'm not worried about, okay? I mean, I'm not worried about the spelling now. Later, yeah. Know your food danger zone temps. What is the food danger zone? Between just 40, 140, okay? 40 and 140 in between there. Why does that matter? Why is it important?
To make sure the food outside within the zone.
What happens in the danger zone that we don't want to happen?
Bacteria.
Bacteria growth, right? So below 40 is what? The fridge zone, right? Cool zone, or freezer, right? Even lower, right? And 140 and above is hot holding or cooking temperature, right? So that is now temperature controlled, right? So in between the food danger zone, that's when bacteria is going to grow the most. So we're trying to minimize that growth, okay? That's why the food danger zone matters. Okay, you have to be able to explain that. Why the food danger zone matters. Okay? What does PHF stand for? Yes, potentially hazardous foods. But again, without using your book. Potentially hazardous foods. And why are they important? Aren't all foods potentially hazardous? No. Some are more hazardous than others. Okay? So when we are working with PHS, we have to be extra careful. Okay? We have to really be careful about our food safety. Whenever we're using PHS, or whenever we're working with PHS, we have to be more careful than normal. Okay? You will need to know the two methods for cooling food. I've already mentioned one today, right? Stage 1, which is 140 to 41 or below. That's stage 1. Stage 2, anyone remember? 140 to in how many hours?
No more than 2 hours.
Yeah, and then from 70 to 40 in
Another 4 hours.
another 4 hours. So you're going to need to know your stage 1 and stage 2 cooling methods. Okay, stage 1 and stage 2 cooling methods, you need to know the temperatures and times for those. We already just talked about this, 140 to 40 in 4 hours, or 140 to 70 in 2 hours, and 70 to 40 in 4 hours. Okay? You need to remember this, the two different stages of cooling. Okay? Also remember the HACCP info we just talked about today. I hope to God you remember it, because we just talked about it about 30 minutes ago. How many steps to HACCP are there? 7. Thank God. Thank you for that one. Just that one. Thank you. What are they? Oh, yes. So quickly we forget. First thing we have to do is perform a hazard analysis. Next thing we have to do is determine our we identify our critical control points. It would be more helpful if you didn't look at your book for this. We set up our critical control points, then we have to set our critical limits. Then we have to monitoring. We set up a monitoring system. Then we have to define corrective action. And then we have to what was that? You know what this sounds like? This is what it sounds like. Thank you. Then we have to validate the system, meaning make sure it works. And last, we have to record keeping procedure. We have to set up a procedure for keeping records. Normally, in most hotels, they keep their records for 6 months. They have an entire room just full of records. Okay? So that's important. Okay, good. You will also need to know about MIT. I don't mean the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. What does MIT stand for? Yes, however, I will accept just minimum internal temperature. Okay? Because whenever we talk about minimum internal temperature, we're usually always talking about cooking. Okay? So just to shorten that whole acronym, MIT is minimum internal temperature. Okay? Why does minimum internal temperature matter? Who cares?
To make sure the bacteria all die.
Yes, but you're close. You're like, there's a swimming pool, you're like, right? You want to go in, you're just like, I can't get it. This is similar, everything is connected, okay? So think back about when we talked about the storage in the fridge, right? Not everything has the same MIT, right? So we have to know our minimum internal temperatures because when we're cooking things, we don't want to overcook them. If you cooked a piece of fish to 165 degrees Celsius, it would be horrible. It would be a horrible piece of fish, right? And if you cooked a piece of chicken to 135 degrees Celsius, it would still be medium rare in the middle, right? And most people would be like, ah, right? They get up and run away when it's undercooked chicken, okay? Although you'd probably be fine eating it. But we have to know our minimum internal temperatures because different bacteria are killed at different temperatures, okay? The bacteria that lives in fish is not the bacteria that lives in chicken, okay? They're not the same. Okay? It's not like one bacteria for everything, okay? So we have to know the different temperatures because different temperatures will kill different bacteria. Okay? So that's why minimum internal temperatures are important. You should know some examples of PHFs. And again, this is in your book. There's an entire list in your book of different types of potentially hazardous foods. This is fairly easy though, right? Raw meats, raw fish, raw poultry, dairy products like cheese, okay, milk, garlic and oil, okay, unprocessed garlic and oil, soy-based products, sprouted plant-based products, heat-treated plant-based foods, okay? I think in your book there's what, 7 examples, 6 examples, maybe 8? 9? You would be wise to remember all 9. Okay. What is the lag time? I already talked about it once today, and I've talked about it several times throughout this course. Can anyone tell me what is lag time? Not necessarily wakes up. It's not really sleeping. I use the example of sleeping so it's easier for you to understand. So not sleeping. Yes. Remember that cold temperatures slow bacteria down, right? Just like us. We go out to cold temperature, we're like, ooh. Right? Nobody's out there like, it's cold out here, right? Except for weird people. So bacteria, when it comes out of the fridge, it's cold. It's like, God, it's so freezing in there. Then it starts to warm up. It's like, oh, it's kind of nice out here. And then it starts to get warm, right? And then it's having a good time, right? It's with itself, and then it multiplies. There's 2 of them. He's like, hey, how's it going? And then there's 4 of them. Like, hey, what's up, guys? And there's 8 of them. Like, oh, this is a party. And there's 16. And there's 32. They're like, oh my God, it's like family reunion. So that's the lag time. Basically, the lag time is the amount of time it gets for the amount of time needed for the bacteria to get used to its new environment. Okay? That's the more exact definition of it, right? So it's the amount of time the bacteria needs to get used to its new environment. Its new temperature, its new moisture environment, whatever it may be. Okay? So that is the lag time. You will need to know that. You'll need to know when an accident happens at work, what is done. Okay? In your book, you're going to look in the section about accidents, workplace accident reporting. And there's several steps that are involved in that, okay? You're going to need to know that. It's also in the PowerPoints in your e-learning. If it's not directly in your book, sometimes there's charts in my PowerPoints that don't put in your book. So, and the PowerPoints are all in the e-learning, by the way, yeah? So, it's all the information is there. If it's not directly in your book, then it's in the PowerPoint, okay? But there's several steps that have to happen when an accident happens, right? For example, the accident is reported to the supervisor, right? Then the company does an investigation. The worker is given medical treatment or not, depending on how severe the accident is, right? So there's several steps that go into that, right? They might go to the hospital. Once they go to the hospital, they get physiotherapy or they come out and they get treatment. Then eventually they go back to work, okay? So you'll need to know the basic process of injury back to work, okay? There are several different steps along that way. So make sure you look in e-learning for the accident reporting system. It's in the PowerPoints, okay? Good luck. This, your midterm review for study degrees is already on your e-learning, okay? So if you look now in your e-learning under study degrees, you'll see the midterm PowerPoint, the midterm review PowerPoint already on there. I won't post this until later today when I get home, okay? Because I'm not going back to my office today, but as soon as I get home, the first thing I'm going to do, maybe not the first thing, but very close to the first thing I'm going to do, is grab my laptop, turn it on, and upload this to your e-learning system, okay? So that you can start to study immediately. Again, like I said in study ingredients today, get this on your computer, get your book, start going through, make some notes, and then get a friend, let's study a bit, practice, test each other, asking questions, okay? Easiest way to do it. Any questions? Not a single question?
Sir,
Yes?
the test is also the same as the form.
No, it's different questions.
Oh, different format.
Oh, same, similar format, yeah. Oh, you mean it's like the type of questions?
Yeah.
It's not the same test. Just joking. The study degrees test is the same as your hygiene and safety quiz. No, yeah, it's the same. So there's multiple choice, there's true and false. I think there's some matching as well, maybe cutting boards, maybe, I can't remember. But it's very similar. I write all my tests very similar. A little bit of matching, a little bit of true and false, a little bit of multiple choice, a little bit of short answers. There's never really like a long answer section, because I don't want to read that much. So the tests are always written in a similar way, a little bit of each, okay? Good question, by the way. All right, so with that being said, then you also need to pick your numbers 1 and 2. Now, a lot of teachers, I don't know why, a lot of teachers, they just let all the students come at one time and take their test. I'm not a big fan of that because I don't think that's very, I don't think it's appropriate, okay? Part of my job is to also make sure that you guys are taking the test fairly, right? So, for that reason, I like to split you up when you're in larger groups like this. To be honest with you, I'd rather have a much bigger room for tests and then we can all do it once, but this is the room we have, so this is the room we use. So that's why I split you up. But I would imagine I'm probably the only teacher that has done that, or will do that. Most of your other teachers just like, yeah, come on in and take your test, you know? But anyways, that's their choice. I don't like it, so I don't do it. Anyways. Okay, now I'm more prepared today. I'm more prepared this afternoon than I was this morning. To be honest with you, I forgot we were doing our 1 and 2 check this morning because I had a lot of other stuff to do, and then I couldn't remember, and I didn't have really enough time. So now I've got a whole bag full of 1s and 2s. And I actually printed this last week for this morning, and I completely forgot it in my office way back over there. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to get it now. So I've got a whole bag of 1s and 2s ready for you to choose. So you guys can come up, a couple people at a time. Not everybody. Everyone's like, get them up, get 2. Just relax. Jesus. There's lots of 1s and lots of 2s. Hey, just don't freak out. It's like you think there's money in here or something. It's not a real 1 or 2, it's just a piece of paper. Right? So just don't freak out, please. How about this? You 5 ladies, come up and choose. Just them 5. Okay, the rest of you sit down. Okay, you're not the ladies. You stay right there. All right. What do we got? A number 1. Number? So you have to remember what your number is, yeah? All right. All right. Here we go. What do we got? The big reveal. And it is a number 2 again. That's easy for you, right? What number? 14. There it is. Yeah. 2. All right. Here we go. The excitement builds. 1. 5. Tell. Okay. Here we go. The excitement. You can feel it. 1 and number 11. Sorry, it takes a while to remember all your names. Okay, and here we go. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Just choose one of them. Number? Yes, I'll show you. Number 2. That 2? All right. You know what I was thinking as well? I had thought I was going to print 1 number 3 and then put it next to one of you picks a 3. It's like, well, 3. What do we do? We only said 1s and 2s. But then I forgot about it, so I didn't do that. But I'll remember that next time. All right, you 3 ladies, come on up. I got a 3. What's going to happen? I failed. I already failed. I got a 3. All right. Whoa, okay. Don't take the whole bag. Number 13. 15. Ruby 1 and 2. 12. So remember your numbers. Write them down in your book. Write them down in your book. If you're a 1, you're here at 120. And if you're a 2, you're here at 2. Okay? That's easy, right? 2, 2. Okay? If the doors are still closed, you just wait outside. Got it? Okay, but be here so that when everyone's done, we can. Okay? You 2 gentlemen, come on up here. Okay? Winston, yeah.
Where's Steve?
Hey, they both begin with W, it's close.
Yeah.
Let's 1.
No.
Alright, here we go.
No. West.
And you are Wilbert. You're W as well, huh? WWW. All right. You 5 gentlemen. Here we go. Oh, let's. Yeah, you guys get roll your sleeve way up there. It's Aaron, right? 1. Okay. Remember your numbers. Yeah. Hold on. We have to fix that. Here we go. Oh my God. And you're Alan? Yeah. Wow. So many. Are you done? No, make sure you get the right. Okay. 2. Okay. All right. Here we go. Alvin. What do we got? What do we got? I don't know. 2. Okay, put it back in. Shoot, right? What do we got? 1. Okay, sure. All right, you 5 ladies, come on up. All right, here we go. Wait, did you get a 2? Sorry, I was waiting for your number. Like, 2, got it. 1. 29. The 2? Oh, that's a 1. Oh, don't lie to me. Okay. 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 Go. You got a 3? 2? Okay. All right. All right, what do we got here? 1. Satu. You're 21?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And you 4 lady? Oh, you get the little fist bump here? All right. I don't know if you guys are fist bump about, but seems to have hurt yourselves. Are you okay?
Yes.
Sure? Then you move your hand. Workplace safety. All right, what do we got? And you are 27. Chelsea, 27. 1. Yeah, sure. Okay. Here we go. 2, and you are. Okay, here we go. Okay, science building. 2. All right. There's one number 3 in here. I hope you don't get it. What do we got? 2, and you are down. 2. Okay. Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, that is it for this week. Have yourself a nice weekend. Have you guys confirmed you're going to get a date, right, for a trip on the weekend? Is that? No, I don't. I said, weekend, not this weekend. A weekend. Anyways, is that date being confirmed yet? The date is for sure. When is that? I know it's December. December. So you have. So leave here 11, and then come back 12. What time are you leaving? You know? Probably very early. December 11th, 12th, yeah. Okay. Maybe myself. Do you know Teacher Doug? Teacher Doug? Anyways, we might come, we might not. I don't know. But okay. Have a nice weekend. And we'll see you all next Friday. If you have over the weekend, start to review your material for your exam, okay? So start to look through the PowerPoint, start to look through the book. If you have any questions, send me a message on Microsoft Teams, or send me an email on my email address. Not on anything. Just send me a message on Teams, which is often the best way to do it, because then everyone can see your question, right? And then maybe they have the same question. So it's better to send it on Teams so that everyone can see the question and the answer. Okay? If it's just an email, it's kind of annoying, because then you only get the answer. Right? Not that I would give you the answer, but so let's just say no emails. If you have a question, go to Microsoft Teams, ask the question in the group, not in the chat, right? And then everyone can see the question and the answer. Okay? So if you have any questions, now in the midterm, please ask. Okay? Same for the studied ingredients. Go through the material this weekend, don't wait. If you have any questions, go on the studied ingredients, question, and I'll answer it as soon as possible. Okay? Alright, have a nice weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.